Hello and welcome to Tech Deals Part 1, parts overview of the $800 i3-8350K 4-core 4-thread system build. Yes, in late 2018. Don't change that channel, don't touch your dial. No, tech has not gone crazy. This really is an $800 4-core 4-thread i3 build with a liquid cooler and a Z-series board and a GTX 1050 in 2018. This is a very specific build for a very specific type of person. First of all, this is not for content creation, this is not for office use, this is not for anything other than one purpose: gaming, and a very specific kind of gaming at that. First of all, let me say right up front, if Battlefield 5, Call of Duty Black Ops 4, if Far Cry 5, if any of the new AAA games, the new Assassin's Creed game, if any of that stuff is what you want to play, this is not the build for you, and I'm going to have a specific suggestion for you here in just a minute. However, if you either play older games, online MMOs, if you are a competitive esport gamer and clock speed is the only thing that matters to you, and generally core count is not, if you want a computer that has 5 gigahertz of clock speed and per core performance matters far more to your specific game than how many cores and threads you have, you've come to the right place. Now, before we go any further with this, I do want to be abundantly clear with something. For the same $800, you could replace the motherboard with a B450, you could completely eliminate the liquid cooler, and you could replace the CPU with a Ryzen 5 2600X, which runs at about 4 gigahertz out of the box on the included Wraithspire cooler, still use this graphics card, and for the same money, you would in general have a much better computer with a much better balance of price to performance. But that Ryzen 5 2600X is only ever going to run at about 4.1 to 4.2 on its included cooler with the built-in boost. Even if you spend a fortune in cooling, you're not really going to get it much beyond 4.2 gigahertz, and the per core, per clock performance is not as good as Intel is. Some games genuinely do care about the CPU choice, and some games are very clock speed sensitive. Not a lot, which is why I said at the beginning of this video, this isn't for everybody. Let me give you a simple example that I absolutely know for sure this will run much better. Star Wars: The Old Republic, the online massively multiplayer role-playing game from BioWare. Well, really EA, because EA owns BioWare and has for some time. But Star Wars: The Old Republic runs much better on Intel chips than it does on AMD chips. It always has. The libraries were optimized for it. It's never been rewritten or optimized because that game is like 7 years old now. But it's still popular. People play it. And most importantly, it's clock speed dependent. It only uses 2 cores. That game will not use the 6 cores, 12 threads of a Ryzen 5 2600X. The other day, I was live streaming Star Wars: The Old Republic on Twitch. Link to my Twitch channel down in the video description below. I was live streaming it, and I pulled up Task Manager for everybody to see in the stream, and we were using like 8% of the CPU total. Now, that was an i7-8700K. It didn't care about the cores. It cares about the clock speed. In online player versus player in the war zones, if you do PvP in Star Wars: The Old Republic, it's all CPU and clock speed dependent. Not core, clock speed. It's a corner case where this chip makes sense. To most people, it doesn't. To most people, you should get a 6 or 8 core chip. You should get a Ryzen 5 or an i5 or an i7. But if you only play certain games that care about clock speed and not cores, then what's the point in buying a 6-core, 8-core chip if you're not going to use it? Instead, this should run at or close to 5 gigahertz on a 120mm liquid cooler on a reasonably basic level Z370 board. It's not the lowest end board. You can get cheaper boards than this, but this is a nice board for overclocking. It's got good power delivery. It's got good features. It's about $140. You can get Z370s for $100. They may or may not overclock to 5 gigahertz. And if 5 gigahertz is your goal, you might want to spend a bit more to get a board with power delivery. So, with that speech out of the way as to why Ryzen 5 2600X is a better deal for most people, but it isn't going to run at 5 gigahertz, and for certain games, such as MMOs, World of Warcraft, Star Wars: The Old Republic, and in fact many other MMOs, not only are they clock speed dependent, but a lot of them like Intel. Let's move on to talk about these parts and why I chose the rest of them. Let's start off by talking about the CPU briefly, although I kind of already have. The i3-8350K is the unlocked K chip in the i3 line, 4 cores, 4 threads. You can think of it as the previous generation Kaby Lake's i5K chip, 4 cores, 4 threads unlocked. It's been brought down to i3 for the 8th generation. Now, it does require a Z370 board. You can't install it in the old Z270 or Z170. It does require a Z370 if you want to overclock it. You can put it in the cheaper boards, but that would make no sense. You'd buy the non-K chip if you're going that route. It does not come with a cooler, hence the reason for a cooler. Now, you don't have to use a liquid cooler. I'm just using this because it goes nicely with the case. You could also use one of the recent Cooler Master coolers that I've recently covered, the 4 or the 6 heat pipes. The 6 heat pipe would be more likely to get you 5 gigahertz if you're trying to overclock. In general, the 4-core, 4-thread chips aren't going to need or shouldn't need the $90 to $100 coolers, either like a Noctua D15 or a 240 or 280 millimeter liquid cooler, because it just makes less heat. We'll see when we get to it, however. We'll do some overclocking tests once we put this together. It's 4 gigahertz out of the box, but we'll see. 5 gigahertz is the goal in any case, but we'll cover that in a future overclocking video. Now, I mentioned the H50 here. Now, the H60 is a more universal cooler from Corsair. The H50 is a quiet version for Intel only. It doesn't include the AMD mounting brackets in it. And to be honest, I'm using it because Corsair sent it to me. Otherwise, I'd use an H55 or an H60 or the Master Liquid 120 from Cooler Master. I actually have one of those over on the shelf, but it's a Corsair case, so why not go full Corsair? You could also, as I mentioned, use a air cooler, tower cooler. Something in the $30 to $50 range would be appropriate. Spend a bit more, get a bit more cooling. That's just personal preference. But these are about $50, and $50 worth of cooling for a $170 overclockable CPU is about right. System memory. 8 gigabytes is an option for a build like this, and depending upon the game that you're playing, 8 gigabytes might be all that you need. I generally don't build 8 gigabyte systems, I build 16 gig systems, and so we're going with 16 gigabytes of Corsair DDR4 2133. Yeah, I know it's slow. Yes, I know this supports faster. We're going to overclock it, don't you worry. I will cover the overclocking of RAM, something that I've never done on my channel before. I've always installed like DDR4 3000 or 3200, which just you turn on XMP and it auto sets itself, and it works because it's guaranteed by the manufacturer. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to use 2133. It is cheaper. And then we're going to manually overclock it in the BIOS along with the CPU in the overclocking video. But as far as the RAM goes, whether you go 8 or 16, that's just personal preference based upon the games that you play. For storage, we're going to use the SX6000 from ADATA, NVMe M.2 solid state drive. I recently did a video on this drive, and I compared it to the SU800 from ADATA, which is the non-NVMe, the SATA drive. Also an M.2 format, by the way. The M.2 is just an interface format. NVMe versus SATA is what matters. Now, I actually would not recommend you buy the 128 gig drive, and I covered that in the video. The 256 gig drive is only $15 more. This is $40, and then that's $55. For $15 more, you get tons more storage space and much better performance. The only reason I'm putting this in the build, to be completely honest, is because I have it sitting on the shelf from that benchmark video that I did. Otherwise, there'd be a 256 gig drive in here, so add $15 for that. And while it's not in the $800 budget here, the 256 gig would be. Because this really isn't large enough, I'm also going to put in the 480 gigabyte Mushkin Triactor SATA SSD that I did a previous video on. Very nice drive, by the way. The Mushkins are nice. They're not the fastest drives on the market, but I'm going to put this in because I do need space to put games like Star Wars The Old Republic on here, and those really don't fit in 128 gig. They would fit fine if you got the 256 gig drive. If you're just going to put a couple of games on your machine, that might be all that you need. Otherwise, maybe get a secondary hard drive for $25 to $50, depending upon how much space that you need. Motherboard. I'm going with the ASRock Z370 Killer SLI. I mentioned before it's a $140 board. It's about 40% more expensive than you can get Z370s. There's a number of different Z370s you can buy for about $100. But when you cut the board down that far, you give up a ton of features. You often give up VRM cooling, you give up power phases, which is important for overclocking, depending on how high you want to go, that is. You give up M.2 slots, the audio chip for gaming goes to inferior quality. You often have a lower quality LAN chip. You're missing USB ports and other connections. This is a nice compromise between spending too much on a board, because you can spend $200, $250 easily on a Z-Series board if you want to, and going with the bargain basement boards, which honestly are stripped a little bit too much for my opinion, for a K chip, for overclocking. Something in the $130 to $150 price range strikes me as reasonable for a balance of price, performance, features, and compatibility with a chip like this. Where would a system like this be without a graphics card? Now, it is true that Intel includes integrated graphics with all of their chips. Intel's integrated graphics are terrible. If you're buying a K chip and overclocking, don't use the integrated graphics. Frankly, why they even include them is beyond me, because anybody buying a K chip really should have a dedicated graphics card, in my opinion. They are terrible. Now, this here is a GTX 1050 Ti. I kind of wavered between different graphics card choices. I played around with this build and gave this a lot of thought before actually deciding on this card. You can spend about $30 less and get a GTX 1050, and you lose 2 gigs of VRAM. You go from 4 to 2, which for many of the games this is meant to play, for what you would build this for, doesn't matter. Star Wars: The Old Republic's not going to care. World of Warcraft, at least as far as I know, is not going to care. League of Legends isn't going to care. CSGO is not going to care. Dota 2, Heroes of the Storm, most of the stuff that wants 5 gigahertz and doesn't care about core count, doesn't care about 4 gigs of VRAM. On the other hand, this changes with time, and maybe you like the 4 gigs of VRAM for a little bit of future-proofing. Textures and details are getting higher. I understand that. Maybe you want the core count for high frame rates, but you're also going to play at, say, 1440p instead of 1080p. Extra VRAM is nice for that as well. And even though it's, quote, only a GTX 1050 Ti, don't knock it. 1440p in Star Wars: The Old Republic, that'll do that just fine. Now, I thought about an RX 580. They aren't much more expensive than this, and on a price-to-performance basis, an RX 580 is a better deal for most games. However, just like games like Star Wars: The Old Republic work better on Intel chips than they work on AMD, sad to say, a lot of those same games work better on NVIDIA chips than they do AMD. Most games work just fine on AMD chips. They really, really do. An RX 580 and a GTX 1060, not 1050, are very, very similar in performance, within 5–10% in almost all games, except a few. Especially older games, and especially games like MMOs, certain esports, and a few other things that just work better on NVIDIA cards. And so I ultimately decided to go with the 1050 Ti as a compromise. It's your build. Change it any way you want. If you think your game titles don't care, an RX 580 for about, $40 or $50 more than this is a better deal. It's a solid 50 to 60% faster than this card for a relatively small increase in price. And you can get those with 8 gigs of VRAM for no more than $50 more than this, or 4 gigs of VRAM for maybe $30, $35 more. So those are a better deal on a price to performance. Or cut it down to a GTX 1050 and save yourself $30 or $40 in that direction. It just depends upon what games you're playing. So for a compromise, this is what I went with. For the power supply selection, I went with the CX550M semi-modular power supply. This is actually overkill for this build. You don't remotely need this much. And for its price, you're paying a bit to get that modular component to it. I've covered the 450BT from EVGA several times on my channel. It's often available on sale in the $25 to $30 price range. 450 watts is absolutely plenty. 400 watts, even overclocked, 400 watts would be enough for a build like this. But those power supplies are not semi-modular, and in the tight confines of a micro ATX or a mid-tower case, if you want clean cable management, sometimes it's nice having a modular power supply. That, and maybe you want to upgrade in the future. Perhaps you're not always going to be on an i3. Maybe you want to go to an i7 when they get cheaper in the future, or an i5. Perhaps you want to upgrade the graphics card in the future. It does give you that option. And then, to be completely honest with you, I had this on the shelf and I'm all out of 450BTs. I would be really tempted to put one of those in here, but quite literally, I don't have any more. I used my last one in my previous build, and so we're going with the CX550. Finally, that brings us to our case choice. Now, cases are highly personal. Remember, this is a custom build. If you ultimately decide to build a system like this, put the parts in it that you want. Change things around. Case choice, power supply choice, coolers, video cards, motherboards. The whole point of custom building is to build it the way you want. Otherwise, you'd go and buy something from CyberPower PC, iBuyPower, or Dell or HP. In this case, we're going with the Corsair Spec 04. I've already done a whole video on this case covering up front, back, sides, taking it off, so I'm not going to show it to you here. It is a nice case. This is the tempered glass version of the case. It's $10 more than the plastic version. Personal choice. Do you want glass on the side or do you want plastic on the side? In this case, it's $59. The plastic version is $49. Take your pick. But for components of this level, for a 120 millimeter liquid cooler, for a power supply that's a standard size, for a standard size motherboard, all these components should fit in there just fine. And it's a reasonable price and looks sufficiently gamery on the front. Now that's all the parts that are going into this build, the one optional SSD just because, and then the rest of it. I've done many build video series on my channel. There will not be a dedicated build video for this. And I know some people will be disappointed to hear that, but I've done tons of them. How to build a computer, I've done. I am very time crunched this week when I'm filming this because I'm getting ready to close on my new filming space. This room that you've seen me record in for the past year and a half, hopefully will be a thing of the past, and I will have a multi-room setup for doing different kinds of videos, and the quality should hopefully improve. That's I'm in the middle and transition of. So I'm doing the parts overview with a little bit of Y-vlog here. The next video will probably be overclocking. I don't think I need to show how to install Windows because I've done that many times, and same thing with the build. What I want to focus on with this particular build is how to overclock RAM, how to overclock that CPU, and how does it overclock on a 120 millimeter liquid cooler. And then I want to show you some game benchmarks. I'm not going to bother with non-gaming benchmarks. It's a 4-core, 4-thread chip. If you cared, you'd buy something better. But this is all about how well does it play esports games? How well does it play? Ultimately, I want to show you how well does this play games like Star Wars The Old Republic in player versus player war zones, which is really what you need the 5 gigahertz for. I have quite literally thousands of hours of experience, probably more than I should admit, in Star Wars The Old Republic. I have 38 either level 65 or level 70 characters in that game, so it's a subject I can discuss with extreme authority. In any case, I hope you've liked this video. Links in the description below to everything that I've shown you here. I will put a couple links down in the description below to an alternate build as well. As I said before, for most people, a Ryzen 5 2600X for the same money does make more sense on a B450 board with the stock cooler. While it's 1 gigahertz clock speed less, it's 6 cores, 12 threads, which is really the better choice for the average gamer. This is kind of a special use case. In any case, I hope you liked this video and the upcoming ones, which will be linked in a playlist down below. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it, leave a comment down below, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.